The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall glass windows of the new Seoul Space Art Gallery. The year was 2157, and the gallery stood as a testament to humanity's progress, a towering structure of glass and metal that seemed to touch the clouds. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with the quiet energy of preparation. Haeta Park stood at his usual spot near the main entrance, his back straight as a ruler. At 62 years old, he took great pride in his position as head curator of the most prestigious art gallery in New Seoul. His gray hair was perfectly combed, and his black suit didn't have a single wrinkle. He held a digital tablet in his hands, checking and rechecking the final preparations for the upcoming exhibition. "Sir, the quantum holographic projectors in Section C are fully calibrated," a young staff member reported, bowing slightly. Haeta nodded without looking up from his tablet. "Good. Make sure the energy fields are stable. We can't have any fluctuations during the exhibition." His voice carried the weight of authority earned over 30 years of curating traditional art exhibitions. This show, however, was different. It was their first major quantum holographic art exhibition, and everything had to be perfect. The gallery halls hummed with the soft sound of advanced technology. Invisible energy fields held the quantum holographic art pieces in perfect suspension, ready to interact with viewers in ways that traditional art never could. Some pieces would respond to emotions, others would change based on memories, and a few could even create unique experiences for each visitor. As Haeta reviewed the guest list one more time, a woman approached the entrance. She wore simple clothes, a plain brown jacket, comfortable pants, and practical shoes. Her hair was tied back in a casual style, and she carried a small bag over her shoulder. Haeta looked up briefly, then back down at his tablet. "The gallery is closed for final preparations," he said firmly, not bothering to make eye contact. "The exhibition opens tomorrow at 10 a.m. The woman stepped forward. "I understand, but I need to check on my installation." Her voice was calm and professional. Haeta finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. He studied her appearance with the critical eye of someone who had spent decades in the elite art world. "Your installation." His tone carried clear doubt. "This is a highly secure pre-exhibition period. Only authorized personnel are allowed inside." The woman reached into her bag. "I have my credentials right here." "Anyone can print credentials," Haeta interrupted, holding up his hand. "I know every artist in this exhibition personally, and I haven't seen you at any of the preparation meetings." He straightened his already straight posture, trying to look even more authoritative. A small group of staff members had gathered nearby, watching the exchange with growing interest. The woman remained remarkably calm, though a slight frown crossed her face. "If you would just check your records," she suggested, "you'll find that I'm Do-hee Kim, the quantum holographic artist." Haeta's expression hardened. In his mind, Do-hee Kim, the famous artist whose work was the centerpiece of the exhibition, would surely arrive in formal attire, probably with an entourage. Not alone, dressed like an ordinary person. "Ma'am, I don't appreciate attempts to deceive gallery staff. Do-hee Kim is a respected artist, and claiming to be her is a serious matter." The woman, who was indeed Do-hee Kim, tilted her head slightly. "You're right. Do-hee Kim is a respected artist, and I am she." Haeta's face reddened. "Security," he called out, gesturing to the guards near the door. "Please escort this person out." Just then, a commotion arose at the entrance. A man in his 30s rushed in, carrying several digital devices. He stopped abruptly when he saw the scene before him. "Do-hee, I'm so sorry I'm late. The traffic was terrible, and the quantum calibration tools needed a last-minute adjustment." Haeta blinked in confusion. The new arrival was Hae-Nul Lee, Do-hee Kim's well-known technical assistant. He looked from Hae-Nul to the woman and back again, his mind struggling to process what was happening. "It's fine, Hae-Nul," Do-hee said calmly. "Mr. Park here was just explaining why I couldn't be who I say I am." The color drained from Kita's face as realization dawned. The security guards, who had started moving forward, now stood frozen in place. The watching staff members whispered among themselves, and someone gasped. Hae-Newell's eyes widened as he understood the situation. "Mr. Park, this is Do-Hee Kim. The Do-Hee Kim, creator of Ancestral Echoes and the other quantum holographic installations that are the centerpiece of this exhibition." Kita's tablet slipped from his hands, clattering on the floor. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent gallery. One of the staff members quickly picked it up and handed it back to him, but Kita barely noticed. But, he stammered, "The preparation meetings. I attended virtually," he explained. "As noted in all the documentation, I was finishing installations at other galleries. My physical presence was only required for the final calibration, which is why I'm here today." Her voice remained professional, but there was a hint of something else in it, not anger, but disappointment. Kita's world seemed to spin. He had indeed received memos about virtual attendance, but he had skimmed over them, focused on what he considered more important details. Now those overlooked details were crashing down around him. A movement caught his eye. One of the staff members had pulled up security footage on a nearby display. It showed Do-Hee Kim visiting the gallery multiple times over the past month, working on her installations. Kita had been present for some of those visits, but had apparently looked right through her, his preconceptions blinding him to her identity. Kita struggled to find words. 30 years of reputation threatened to crumble around him. "I must apologize. I didn't." Do-Hee held up her hand, much as Kita had done earlier, but her gesture was gentle rather than dismissive. "Perhaps we should discuss this after I check on my installation. The quantum holographic fields need precise calibration, and we're losing valuable time." Newell nodded vigorously. "Yes, the energy readings need to be perfect for opening day, especially for Ancestral Echoes. It's the most complex piece in the exhibition." Kita stood rooted to the spot as Do-Hee walked past him, her movements confident and purposeful. Hae-Newell followed, juggling his calibration equipment. The gathered staff quickly dispersed, though their whispered conversations echoed through the gallery. Alone at his post, Kita felt the full weight of his mistake settle onto his shoulders. He looked down at his tablet, now showing the artist profiles he should have checked. Do-Hee Kim's face looked back at him from the screen, the same face he had dismissed moments ago. In the distance, he could hear Hae-Newell's equipment humming as it interfaced with the quantum holographic installations. Do-Hee's voice carried faintly through the gallery, discussing technical adjustments with her assistant. She was focused entirely on her work, as if the incident at the door had never happened. Kita remained at his post, his mind racing. In all his years as curator, he had prided himself on his professionalism, his attention to detail, his ability to identify and promote artistic talent. Yet in one brief encounter, he had revealed blind spots he hadn't known existed. The sun continued its journey across the sky, its light now creating different patterns through the gallery's windows. The shadows had shifted, but Kita Park's world had shifted even more dramatically. And somewhere in the gallery, Do-Hee Kim continued preparing her artwork that, ironically, explored themes of perception, prejudice, and the human capacity for both error and growth. The first part of a much larger story had begun to unfold in the pristine halls of the new Seoul Space Art Gallery, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The news of Kita's mistake spread through the new Seoul Space Art Gallery faster than a quantum signal. Staff members whispered in corners, their eyes following Do-Hee Kim as she worked on her installations. The afternoon sun filtered through the gallery's smart glass windows, creating patterns that danced across the polished floors. Hae-Newell moved around Do-Hee's main installation, Ancestral Echoes, waving his calibration tools in careful patterns. The artwork filled an entire room, Its quantum holographic fields weaving together memories, emotions, and historical events into a living tapestry of light and shadow. When active, it would respond to each viewer's presence, showing them reflections of their own prejudices and preconceptions. The primary field is stable, Haynul reported, checking his readings. But the emotional resonance needs fine-tuning. He glanced at Dewey, who stood quietly observing the shimmer of quantum particles in the air. "Are you okay? After what happened?" Dewey adjusted a control panel on the wall. "Focus on the calibration, Haynul. We have more important things to think about than hurt feelings." But the incident at the entrance had created ripples that couldn't be ignored. Young Mi Cho, the gallery owner, arrived earlier than planned after receiving urgent messages from several staff members. She walked briskly through the gallery, her heels clicking against the floor, her face tight with concern. Keita saw her coming and straightened his already rigid posture. "Ms. Cho, I can explain." "Not here." Young Mai cut him off, gesturing toward her office. As they walked, she noticed how Keita's usual confidence had crumbled. His shoulders sagged slightly, and his steps weren't as sure as they usually were. In the office, Young Mai closed the door and sat behind her desk. The room's smart walls displayed a calming ocean scene, but the atmosphere was anything but calm. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said. Keita recounted the morning's events, his voice growing quieter with each word. When he finished, Young Mai leaned back in her chair and let out a long breath. 30 years, Keita. You've been in this industry for 30 years. How did you not recognize one of the most important artists of our time?" I had expectations," Keita admitted. "I thought she would arrive differently, more formally, with an entourage, perhaps." "You mean you thought she would be different because she's—" Young Mai left the sentence unfinished, letting Keita face the truth of his assumptions. Meanwhile, in the main gallery, more people had arrived for the final preparations. Art critics, board members, and technical specialists filled the spaces between installations. Many had come early, drawn by messages about the morning's incident. Dewey continued her work, moving from one piece to another with calm focus. Her quantum holographic art pieces were scattered throughout the gallery, each one designed to challenge viewers' perceptions in different ways. One installation showed how people's faces changed in others' eyes based on prejudice. Another revealed the invisible threads of bias that connected and divided communities. Haynul watched the growing crowd with concern. "Maybe we should take a break," he suggested. "There are too many people watching." "Let them watch," Dewey replied, making a minor adjustment to a quantum field. Sometimes the best art happens when people think no one is performing. Back in the office, Young Mai was showing Keita something on her desk display. "Look at these," she said, pulling up images from art magazines and news articles. Doo-hee Kim has been featured in every major art publication. Her work has been displayed in the biggest galleries worldwide. She's won awards you've presented on stage. Keita stared at the images, his face growing paler with each one. There she was, receiving the Global Art Innovation Award just last year, speaking at the World Art Technology Summit, being interviewed by the most respected art critics. And in many of the photos, she wore clothes similar to what she had on today. Simple, practical, focused on comfort rather than show. "I failed terribly," Keita whispered. "Yes, you have," Young Mai agreed. "But failure is not the end. It's what you do next that matters." She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the gallery floor below. "Do you see what's happening down there?" Keita joined her at the window. Below, a small crowd had gathered around ancestral echoes. Doo-hee was explaining something to them, her hands moving gracefully as she described the interaction between quantum fields and human consciousness. The observers listened intently, completely focused on her words. "She's not angry," Keita observed, surprised. "No, she's not," Young Mai said. "She's professional. She's focused on her art, but don't mistake her composure for lack of impact. What happened this morning? It matters. It matters a lot." In the gallery, Doohy had activated a small section of ancestral echoes for a demonstration. The quantum holographic field shimmered, showing glimpses of various people going about their daily lives. As each person appeared, the field also showed how others perceived them, the assumptions, the prejudices, the blind spots. The quantum fields can read both conscious and unconscious bias. Doohy explained to the gathered crowd. They show us not just what we think we see, but what our deeper programming tells us to see. She adjusted a control, and the image is shifted. When the full installation is active, visitors will experience their own biases reflected back at them. It can be uncomfortable. Someone in the crowd spoke up. "Is that what happened this morning with Mr. Park?" The room grew quiet. Even the humming of the quantum fields seemed to dim. Doohy paused her adjustments and looked at the questioner. "This morning was a perfect example of why this exhibition is necessary," she said carefully. "We all carry preconceptions. The question is, what do we do when they're revealed to us?" Newell watched the crowd's reaction. Some people nodded in understanding. Others looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing similar biases in themselves. A few glanced toward the office where Kita and Young Mei stood watching. The afternoon wore on, and the final preparations continued. Technical staff ran last checks on the quantum holographic systems. Security teams reviewed their protocols. Critics and board members wandered between installations, making notes and having quiet discussions. Kita remained in Youngmi's office, working on a public statement. Words like apologize, inexcusable, and learning opportunity filled his screen. But they felt hollow, inadequate for the magnitude of his mistake. "Maybe I should resign," he said, not for the first time. Young Mei shook her head. "Running away won't fix anything. Face this. Learn from it. Help others learn from it too." As evening approached, Doohy finished her final calibrations. Ancestral Echoes was ready, its quantum fields perfectly tuned to interact with tomorrow's visitors. She packed up her tools and prepared to leave, looking as calm and composed as she had when she first arrived that morning. Keita watched her from the office window, wondering how tomorrow would unfold. The exhibition would open to great fanfare, but now it carried an unplanned weight. His actions had added an unexpected layer of meaning to Doohy's work, making its message about perception and prejudice even more powerful. The setting sun cast long shadows through the gallery windows, much like it had that morning. But everything else had changed. In the space of one day, comfortable assumptions had been shattered, hidden biases exposed, and the true power of art to challenge and change perceptions had been demonstrated in the most unexpected way. Part 2 of the story ended as it had begun, with people watching Doohy Kim walk through the gallery doors. But this time, everyone saw her clearly for who she was. And tomorrow, when the exhibition opened, they would all see themselves more clearly too. The morning of the exhibition opening arrived with a mix of excitement and tension. The new Seoul Space Art Gallery gleamed in the early light, its walls humming with the energy of dozens of quantum holographic installations. News of yesterday's incident had spread through the art community overnight, and a larger-than-expected crowd gathered outside the gallery's doors. Doohy Kim arrived early, wearing the same simple style of clothing as the day before. This time, no one stopped her at the entrance. Instead, staff members bowed deeply as she passed, their faces showing a mix of respect and shame. Newell followed close behind, carrying his usual array of technical equipment. "The quantum fields are all stable," he reported, checking his monitors. "Every installation is running perfectly." Doohy nodded, her attention focused on the growing crowd outside. Among them, she could see art critics, museum directors, and even a few government officials. Many had come not just for the art, but for what would happen when Kita Park made his public statement. Young Cho appeared at Doohy's side. "The press is asking for a joint appearance," she said quietly. "You and Kita, together, but only if you're comfortable with it." "Where is Kita now?" Doohy asked. "In his office. He's been there since dawn, rewriting his statement for the 100th time. Doohy thought for a moment, then headed toward Kita's office. The gallery staff watched her go, wondering what would happen next. Hey Newell made to follow, but Doohy held up her hand. "Stay with the installations," she said. "This needs to be a private conversation." Kita's office was smaller than young Ms., but still impressive. One wall displayed famous paintings from history, while another showed live feeds from various parts of the gallery. He sat at his desk, surrounded by floating holographic screens filled with text. When Doohy entered, he stood up so quickly that several screens flickered and vanished. "Miss Kim," he said, bowing deeply. "I was just working on your statement," Doohy finished for him. She gestured to the screens. "May I?" Kita nodded, and Doohy began reading the floating text. The statement was formal and stiff, full of carefully chosen words about regret and learning opportunities. It mentioned diversity initiatives and sensitivity training. It promised changes and improvements. "This won't do," Doohy said after a few minutes. Kita's face fell. "I've been working on it all night. I wanted to make sure it covered everything." "That's the problem," Doohy interrupted gently. "You're trying to cover everything. But this isn't about policies or initiatives. It's about something much simpler and much harder." She waved her hand, and the holographic screens disappeared. In their place, she activated a small quantum holographic field, similar to the ones used in her installations. The field showed a scene from yesterday. Kita turning her away at the door. "Watch," she said. The scene played out, but this time, they could see more than just actions. The quantum field revealed the thoughts and assumptions swirling around Kita in that moment. His expectations about how a famous artist should look. His automatic dismissal of someone who didn't match those expectations. His complete blindness to the possibility that he might be wrong. Kita watched, his face growing paler with each revealed thought. I never realized." "Most people don't," Doohy said. "That's why I make the art I make. We all carry these hidden patterns in our minds. The trick isn't to deny them, but to learn to see them." Outside the office, the crowd had grown larger. The gallery's opening time approached, and people were eager to enter. Young Mai had begun organizing the staff for the opening ceremony, but everyone knew they were waiting for Kita and Doohy. "What should I do?" Kita asked, looking lost. "Tell the truth," Doohy replied. "Not the carefully worded truth, not the politically correct truth. The real truth, as you're seeing it right now." They walked together to the gallery's main entrance. The staff parted to let them through, and young Mai quickly joined them. Outside, cameras floated in the air, recording everything. The crowd grew quiet as Kita stepped forward. He looked at his prepared statement, then slowly put it away. Instead, he turned to face Doohy. "Yesterday," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "I made a mistake that revealed something ugly in myself. I didn't recognize Doohy Kim, one of our most brilliant artists, because she didn't match the image in my head of what a famous artist should look like." The crowd murmured. Some cameras floated closer. "I've spent 30 years in the art world," Kita continued. "I've given speeches about breaking boundaries and challenging perceptions, but yesterday showed me that I hadn't challenged my own perceptions enough. I looked right through an incredible artist because of my own prejudices." He turned to address the crowd directly. "This gallery is about to open an exhibition that explores how we see, and don't see, each other. I stand before you as someone who just learned that lesson in the most personal way possible." Doohy stepped forward then, standing beside Kita. The contrast between them was striking, his formal suit and her simple clothes, his obvious distress and her calm presence. "Art isn't just about what hangs on walls or floats in quantum fields," she said. "It's about opening our eyes to truth. Sometimes that truth is beautiful. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. But it's always valuable." She gestured to the gallery doors. Inside, You'll find installations that will show you things about yourselves that you might not want to see. You'll experience how your minds create assumptions and judgments without you even realizing it. It might make you uncomfortable. It might even hurt a little. She paused, looking at Kita. But that discomfort, that pain, that's where growth begins. Mr. Park just demonstrated that in the most powerful way possible. The doors of the gallery began to open. The quantum holographic installations inside came to life, filling the space with shifting lights and moving images. Ancestral echoes. Du-hee's centerpiece pulsed with particular brightness, as if responding to the moment. "Welcome," Du-hee said to the crowd, "to an exhibition about seeing clearly. Some of you came because you heard about yesterday's incident. Good. Let that be your first exhibit. Watch what happened, understand why it happened, and then look for those same patterns in yourselves." The crowd began to move forward, but Du-hee held up her hand. "One more thing," she said. "Mr. Park made a mistake yesterday. A serious one. But what matters most is what happens after we recognize our mistakes. Watch him too. Watch how a person can face their own biases and choose to grow." Kaita stood straighter at her words, tears visible in his eyes. The crowd began to enter the gallery, moving past them in a steady stream. Many bowed to both Kita and Du-hee, seeing them differently now than they had just moments before. Inside, the quantum holographic installations came to life, each one designed to reveal different aspects of human perception and prejudice. But now they carried an extra weight, an added meaning. The story of Kita and Du-hee would play out in visitors' minds as they experienced each piece, making the art's message even more powerful. As the last visitors entered, Young Mei touched Du-hee's arm. "That was incredible," she said quietly. "You turned this whole situation into something meaningful." Du-hee smiled slightly. "Art is about transformation," she said. "Sometimes the transformation happens on a wall or in a quantum field, and sometimes it happens in a moment of honest confrontation." The morning sun now filled the gallery completely, making the quantum holographic installations shimmer with extra brilliance. Part 3 of the story ended with Du-hee, Kita, and Young Mei walking together into the gallery, ready to guide visitors through an exhibition that had become about much more than just art. 1 year had passed since the opening of the Earth's Legacy exhibition at the new Seoul Space Art Gallery. The morning sun still created beautiful patterns through the windows, but much had changed inside the building. The gallery had become more than just a space for art. It had become a symbol of transformation. Kita Park sat in his office, which looked very different now. Instead of displaying only famous classical paintings, one wall showed a rolling selection of works by new artists from all backgrounds. His desk no longer held just schedules and reports. Today, it displayed plans for a new project, the Unseen Artists Initiative. A gentle knock on his door made him look up. Du-hee Kim stood there, dressed in her characteristic simple style. Over the past year, that style had become somewhat famous in the art world, with many young artists following her lead and rejecting fancy clothes for practical comfort. "Ready for the presentation?" she asked, entering the office. Kita nodded, standing up. "I still get nervous every time we do this," he admitted. "Telling my story. It's not easy. It's not supposed to be easy." Du-hee replied with a gentle smile. "But it's important." They walked together through the gallery. The quantum holographic installations had changed over the year, but ancestral echoes remained. It had become the gallery's most popular permanent exhibit, drawing visitors from around the world. The installation now included a new element, a recording of what happened that famous morning, integrated into its exploration of human perception and prejudice. Young Mitchell waited for them in the main presentation room. A group of art gallery directors from various cities sat ready to learn about the changes Kita and Du-hee had implemented over the past year. These presentations had become regular events, as other galleries sought to learn from their experience. "Good morning," Kita began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "1 year ago, I made a mistake that changed not just my life, but the way this gallery operates. I failed to recognize one of our most important artists because she didn't match my mental image of what a famous artist should look like. The audience listened intently. Many had heard the story before. It had become quite famous in the art world, but Kita told it differently now. He spoke with a deeper understanding of what had happened that day. That morning taught me something important, he continued. We talk about art breaking boundaries and challenging perceptions, but sometimes we forget to look at our own boundaries and perceptions. We claim to celebrate creativity, while expecting artists to fit into narrow boxes of appearance and behavior. Doohy stepped forward then, activating a small quantum holographic display. It showed images from the past year, new artists whose work had been displayed in the gallery, community outreach programs, educational initiatives for young people from all backgrounds. Change isn't just about saying sorry, she explained to the audience. It's about taking action. Over the past year, this gallery has transformed itself. We've created programs to find and support artists who might have been overlooked before. We've changed how we think about what an artist looks like, acts like, or comes from. Young Me joined them, adding her perspective as the gallery owner. Our visitor numbers have doubled, she reported. But more importantly, the type of visitors has changed. We see people here who never thought an art gallery was for them. They come because they've heard this is a place that sees people clearly. The presentation continued with detailed explanations of their new initiatives. Kita described how they had changed their selection process for new artists, focusing on the art itself rather than the artist's appearance or background. Doohy explained how they had modified their quantum holographic technology to make it more accessible to artists who couldn't afford expensive equipment. But the most powerful moment came when they showed the results. Images filled the air. A teenage girl from the city's poorest district, now a rising star in quantum holographic art. An elderly man whose traditional art had been reimagined through new technology. A group of students from different backgrounds, all learning to create art that crossed cultural boundaries. Art has always been about seeing things differently, Doohy said. But sometimes we forget to look at ourselves. This gallery's transformation began with one moment of clear seeing, when Kita Park finally saw his own prejudices clearly. Keita nodded, looking at the floating images of all they had accomplished. That morning, I thought my career was over, he admitted. Instead, it was just beginning. I learned that real strength isn't in never making mistakes, it's in how we respond to them. After the presentation, as the visiting directors asked questions and took notes, Newell approached with some exciting news. The government had approved funding for their biggest project yet, a nationwide program to bring quantum holographic art technology to underserved communities. They specifically mentioned your story in the approval, Newell told Kita and Doohy. They said it showed how art could transform not just spaces, but people. Later that afternoon, Kita stood in front of Ancestral Echoes, watching visitors interact with the installation. The quantum fields shimmered around them, revealing their thoughts and assumptions just as they had revealed his that morning a year ago. But now, instead of fear or shame, he felt hope when he watched people confront their own biases. A young artist approached him, wearing simple clothes much like Doohy's. "Mr. Park," she said, bowing slightly, "I'm here to submit my work for consideration." 1 year ago, Kita might have dismissed her based on her appearance. Now he smiled warmly. "Welcome," he said. "Tell me about your art." Doohy, watching from across the gallery, saw the interaction and smiled. The quantum fields of Ancestral Echoes rippled gently, as if responding to the moment. In its shifting lights, viewers could see their own prejudices and assumptions, but they could also see the possibility of change. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows through the gallery windows, just as it had on that transformative morning 1 year ago. But these shadows fell differently on a changed space, a changed staff, and most importantly, on changed minds. The story of the new Soul Space Art Gallery had become more than just a cautionary tale about prejudice. It had become a story of hope, showing how one moment of clear seeing could lead to real transformation. The quantum holographic installations still danced with light and shadow, but now they illuminated a path forward, not just for the art world, but for anyone willing to look at themselves honestly and choose to change. As the day ended, Ki-Tai and Du-Yi stood together at the gallery entrance, the same spot where their story had begun. But now they stood as partners in a shared mission, proving that art could do more than hang on walls or float in quantum fields. It could open eyes, change minds, and transform lives. The final chapter of their story had become a beginning for many others, as the ripples of that one morning continued to spread outward, touching lives and changing perceptions, one person at a time.